Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Comic Source. I'm your host, Jace. This is another crowdfunding spotlight. Today, we're here to talk about a campaign that's currently on Zoop. It's a mix between John Wick and Constantine. We have the creator behind the series joining us today. It's my pleasure to welcome him to the stream. Trevor Mueller. Thanks for taking the time to join me.
Thank you so much for having me on. Pleasure to be here.
So you're the writer. We'll talk about the art in a little bit, but why
Mhm.
don't we kick it off by letting the listeners, the viewers, know the elevator pitch. What's the series about?
Sure. As you said, comparison titles, right? It's kind of like John Wick meets John Constantine. It's an action horror story about a contract killer with an ability when he looks his targets in the eyes, he doesn't see them as human. He sees them as angels or demons. And so the idea behind the story is what takes this person who has this very binary view of the world, good and evil, and what helps them to start to see some of the gray in between and some of the inner workings that kind of happen there. And for this particular character, Andres, our main character, it's the fact that he finds himself in a surrogate father role. So there's a little bit of found family elements to it, a little bit of action, a little bit of horror, and hopefully something that fans will really enjoy to read.
Yeah, and for those of you out there in the audience that aren't bilingual or don't know any Spanish, the title that means the eyes. That's how you say eyes in Spanish. So clearly a reference to this character Andres who, as you said, looks people in the eyes and kind of decides. I'm interested in discussing a little more of that kind of binary worldview, right?
Mhm.
Like I feel like that's sort of meta. There's a lot of I don't know if you want to say maybe inflexibility in the world right now, a lot of divisiveness. People are so ingrained in thinking one way or another. I think it's really important to keep an open mind and realize that, the interesting parts of people are often in those gray areas. Nobody's completely one thing or another. Is that kind of how you view things as well? And thus, that's the kind of the journey you're taking this character on because um, I do think, as I said, it's more interesting uh, to start those conversations and to have a character that's not just pigeonholed. Oh, they're a good guy, they're a bad guy. I mean, that's Golden Age comics, right? When they were written for
Right.
kind of a much younger, more innocent, in a lot of ways, naive reader.
No, absolutely. And honestly, like the original premise behind Los Ojos came out probably close to 10 years ago. So a little before we got into, I think, the current situation that we find ourselves in with so much division in the world. But it all stemmed from a question that we used to ask ourselves as children, really, which is, if you and I were to ever switch bodies and I were to see the world through your eyes, would colors still look the same? Would green still be green? Would blue still be blue? And I just took that question a step further and said, well, would I still perceive the world the same way? Would I see situations the same way? Would I see people the same way? And how I always think about things like how do you monetize that, right? Like as a character existing in a world with an ability, how do you make money doing that? And so for this particular character, they decided to use it as a crusade to rid the world of evil. And how do you do that? You do that as a contract killer, right? A killer for hire. And that's what he's doing. He believes that he's ridding the world of evil from these demons that disguise themselves as humans that only he can see. Is he crazy? Is he not crazy? And then you add in a mix in there, a little bombshell, if you will, right? He becomes the surrogate father at the end of chapter one, spoilers. And kids are by nature chaotic neutral. Right? And so it's very difficult to look at the world in this binary good and evil way when you've got this kid screaming like, "Hey, I want mac and cheese." No, wait, that's not the way that you mama makes mac and cheese, right? Like all these different things that aren't intentionally uh, evil by design, but as a person thrust into a situation that's not used to or accommodating those kinds of requests can feel very frustrating. And so that becomes a starting point or a tipping point for Andres within this story to start to realize, is the world as black and white as I have always believed it to be? Are there shades of gray within? that he's never had to tackle before. And to your earlier point about classic golden and silver age comics where you have these mustache twirling villains, right? I'm going to destroy the world today. Today, Gotham, tomorrow, the world. We start off with some villains who are a little bit more focused because the purpose behind this book was to kind of show readers the world as Andres sees it. But we start to unravel that as the story progresses, and we start to see that there are more nuances there, and we start to realize, like, is Andres potentially an unreliable narrator? Is there something else that's going on within this story, which we hope to explore in, a potential volume 2 down the road, which we're actually almost done making. So there's at least going to be a second volume of the book, and we planned on possibly capping it at 3 if we were going to take it that far.
Yeah, really interesting. I especially like what you had to say about perception, because yeah, it's something that yeah, definitely as kids you wonder, like you said, is green green, is blue blue, and I think what's so fascinating about that question, because I don't think in a way it ever really goes away. It's maybe you don't focus on it as much because you're an adult and you just have more responsibilities or what have you, but it's a fact that of a question that will never truly be answered because unless you could somehow or until we somehow are able to implant our consciousness in someone else's body and see through their eyes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Los Ojos, then it's not a question that there's ever going to be an answer to. But yet it's interesting enough, I think, to have that conversation.
Well, and I think in the world that we live in today, with as much divisiveness as there, it's a question that's very much needed. You'll hear I hear a lot in news feeds or in talk shows or those things, this need for empathy. And you can't have empathy without trying to walk a mile in someone else's shoes.
Right. Yep.
And there seems to be a lack of desire to do that kind of thing today. Andres in this story is no different, right? Like he believes the world is a certain way, that it is always been this way, and that he's the only one that can kind of see it. And so it's a little bit of a coincidence that we find ourselves in the situation that we are in as a nation and as a world today that just so happens to kind of align with this character's view. And as a writer, I mean, I consider myself an observer of the human condition. And so the opportunity to sit there and ask the question, why? Somebody thinks differently than me. Somebody sees the situation differently from I do. Why is that? What caused them to believe something differently or to see something differently than what I saw? And so it's applying some of those kinds of techniques into this character who is essentially an action hero, right? Like there's a lot of gunfighting, a lot of monsters, and then it's, up to kind of the reader a bit as to, are the monsters real? Are the monsters all happening inside of his head?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to mention empathy and walking, a mile in someone else's shoes as well. You literally took the words right out of my mouth. The interesting thing is, I think it dovetails into something else that I really, it's like a saying that I've heard that I really kind of ascribe a lot of truth to, which is it's really nice when you have somebody that's ready to listen rather than just waiting for their turn to speak. It's so different to have somebody, listen to you rather than just hear you.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the case of Andres here, you mentioned this tipping point where he has to start taking care of somebody else. And that sort of goes along with what I'm saying. Like when you are responsible for another human, it doesn't matter if you want to, listen or not. You have that responsibility. Like it is thrust upon you. You don't have the opportunity to kind of tune it out and just ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have this responsibility to this person. So I find that to be interesting. You chose that as the thing that kind of makes him start to perhaps change his worldview or at least question things, right? Because in a way, when you become a parent, you do see the world differently. Like especially as you're raising very young children, they see things for the first time and what have you. It's kind of like this vicarious throwback to your own youth. At least that was my experience when my kids were very young.
100%. And again, I think it's different when they're your own kids versus in Andres' situation where it's not his kid, but he's kind of taken on this surrogate father role. It's a little interesting. I assume you've read the book as well, because the first chapter of the book was actually written like 7 years ago.
Hmm.
And we had pitched this to a tiny little publisher that doesn't exist anymore. And it was set up to be a single issue, one and done kind of story. Uh, but I open up to the potential for sequels. And I didn't have an idea for those sequels until I had my own kids.
Wow.
And I'm always thinking about what are the curveballs that you can throw to characters? What are the ways that you can keep characters on their toes and really take them out of their comfort zone? And now that I had that experience under my belt of having my own children, you can up that to the nth degree a little bit with a character who, has a kid, but it's not necessarily their kid, and has this juggling in their mind, right, between this responsibility of a crusade to rid the world of evil and this responsibility at home to protect the people who are important to him. And how does that play a role in his day job? How does that affect his performance? Because as a hitman, right, like you got to be on your game. You got to be, ready to move at a moment's notice. And with kids, you're not sleeping all the way through the night. You're not necessarily getting an uninterrupted workout in. It is a very different lifestyle from a bachelor lifestyle. And so I thought that that was an interesting situation to put this character in. And I only came up with that years after we had told the original story. So this book actually collects like the original story. We put it in color. And then we have the continuation of that story with this new pitch. And I had sent that pitch over to Francisco, and I was like, this is what I'm thinking about doing. And he had also gone through a similar kind of life change where he's like, oh, yeah, this sounds like the kind of story I want to tell too. And I was like, but here's the thing. It's not like one more issue. It's like 15 more issues. And so he was on board. Like he's a very enthusiastic collaborator to work with. And so I count my blessings that he did not sit there and go, dude, you got me for like 2 issues, but that's it, right? Like, or first arc and then I'm out. No, I mean, again, we've already almost finished the second volume of it. And then we're waiting to see how the campaign does as to whether or not we wrap it up in volume 2 or we throw it into a third volume. So very exciting. But yes, these are the types of curveballs that I like to throw at my characters and the inspiration, I think, as to why I decided to resurrect this project so many years after we had finished the initial first story.
Yeah, and the art is really dynamic, everybody. The color work as well, it really pops off the page. The action scenes are fantastic. It really it's not like this photorealistic style. It's a little more kind of traditional, like superhero. But a lot of times when we see horror books, the colors are very dark. The art can look kind of muddy. None of that here. It's not bright, but it's very clean art. And it serves the story very well. So I was very impressed with the artwork. Can you tell us how you first got Francisco involved in the project? Like, so, way back when you did that kind of one and done that has now been expanded upon?
Yeah, I like to use social media to find collaborators to work with. And, there's a handful of hashtags that I follow on a consistent basis. He popped up on one of them. We were in a lot of the same circles. He's an Italian artist. He lives over in Italy, and he was trying to break out into the U.S. comic market. So the original Los Ojos story was the first U.S.-based comic published work that he had had. And since then, he's worked for a number of different publishers over here. He's been over at Source Point Press and a couple of other people, I think, Mad Cave or Black Mask. I can't remember off the top of my head. And so he's done like a whole bunch of comics since then, but this was the first time that he did it. And it's interesting too because we're also working with English as not a first language for him. And so I have to catch myself a lot when it comes to the writing. There was a scene that I wrote or a panel that I had written in the original comic that I like to joke about where I used a localized colloquialism, right? I said, Andres goes through a stack of papers. And what I had meant was Andres is sitting at a desk and has like a file open in front of him and he's thumbing through the papers while he's doing an investigation. What Francisco had drawn was from floor to ceiling a literal stack of papers, and Andres was walking through it. And I was like, my bad. I have to ask you to redraw that panel.
Right.
And now I need to catch myself when it comes to being less descriptive than I normally would. And so since then, we've gotten into a really good rhythm. and have had a long friendship, again, almost 10 years of working together and visualizing these types of stories and these types of characters. And so he's been a real joy. But long answer to a short question, social media is how we ended up meeting.
No, that's fantastic. I loved hearing the nuts and bolts of it. The other thing I was going to mention this earlier and it slipped my mind. There's a movie with Matthew McConaughey that came out in the early 2000s. Powers Booth is in it as well. It's called Frailty. Are you familiar?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that kind of idea of perception because, and it popped into my head when you were talking about as the story progresses in this first volume here, Andres is questioning, am I crazy? Am I really able to see the truth or am I crazy? And that's one of the themes in that film with it. And I love that in the film, it doesn't answer the question. You're kind of left to kind of decide on your own. Um, so I don't want to
If
put
I'm
you on the
not
spot. We don't want to spoil, but I do kind of wonder, will we get a definitive answer or not by the time we get to the end of this story you guys are telling?
Oh, well, you have to buy all three volumes in order to in order to get the answer there. I will say that we do play a lot with perception. I really like playing with perception and trying to keep both the characters and the readers on their toes with those things. So there is a deeper exploration of what is going on in the second volume. And again, volume one really kind of starts as that tipping point, and we'd themed each of these volumes around like a particular element. So volume one is how Andres sees the world, and so that's really what we're getting in this installment that we're funding on Zoop right now. Volume two, if I'm remembering off the top of my head, is how the world sees Andres, right? And then there's a third volume which goes into an additional perception shift in there as well. And through all of those perception shifts, you get a little bit of the truth. And so I think you probably noticed too when you were reading it, right? Like Andres is not the only narrator within the story, and we did that intentionally. Even within a single issue, sometimes we will have one or two narrators that are giving the exposition for the story. And that's because you can start to see some of the various perspectives trickling in while different actions are happening within the panels. And I thought that that was a fun juxtaposition from what you will see in a story where you potentially have an unreliable narrator and whose perception and POV you are definitely seeing through in the first volume, and that starts to unravel as the story progresses.
Yeah, again, I'm glad you brought that up. It was one of my things I wanted to ask about. That's an interesting choice. I don't know that I've read another book where it does change like that. I mean, I'm sure I have, but none immediately come to mind. And it was something that stood out because sometimes you have, two different narrators on the same page, in the same panel even, which is really interesting. I always love stories. Again, to go to a film that's kind of takes that to the extreme is Basic with John Travolta, where you get the same story told by like six different people, and it's all different each time, which is really super interesting. So I'm glad
Well, it
you.
all goes back to the Akira Kurosawa movie. Is
Yeah.
it Sanjiro, right? Where it's three different perspectives and each of them are on the same situation, but they happen in very different ways because they are representing different perspectives.
Right.
So we were doing a little bit of a callback. Akira Kurosawa is one of my favorite directors. So we were doing a little bit of a callback to that. And then the Los Ojos title was because I think at the time I was watching a lot of Robert Rodriguez 90s
Oh yeah.
action movies. And I was like, Desperado, like you get what that is. And it's also in another language. And the eyes like tells you what the story is, but it's a little bit of a boring title. So,
Yeah.
so can we spice that up a little bit? And I thought throwing some Spanish into the title would spice it up.
Yeah, the other thing, to go back to this kind of John Wick inspiration, Hitman kind of thing, it's become such a popular franchise, but not just for what Keanu brings to it, but the supporting cast, right? There's even a Continental, the hotel, a Continental TV show now. You guys have built a pretty rich world here too.
Mhm.
Obviously real world organizations and also, some not so real world, but also a good diverse cast. Um, any challenge there, making sure that we get a fleshed out world, but that we, are telling Andres's story? Is that a tough balance?
It was a little bit, because my background has primarily been in telling young readers stories. Like I cut my teeth on a series called Albert the Alien, which was the first young reader syndicated series on Mark Waid's Thrillbent website, and it got nominated for 2 Harvey Awards. We lost to some guy named Brian K. Vaughan,
Whatever.
right? And then the next year we lost to my buddy Mike Norton because it was the last year he was doing Battle Pug. And I texted him from the Harveys and I was like, "Hey buddy, you just won a Harvey Award." And he sends me a picture and he goes, "Then I guess this is a celebratory beer." But so I cut my teeth on that, and those types of stories tend to be a lot more simple. They
Mhm.
tend to focus on a very small core group of characters, and they don't necessarily jump around a ton. But as the story moved on, because my readers were getting older as we were doing it, we did it over a course of about 6 years. You started to be able to add in some of those complexities, some of those additional characters that flesh out the world, that add additional nuance to what's going on. I just took similar kind of application here with Los Ojos. I mean, I also have 2 Webtoon original series. You can read those for free at webtoon.com. And so those are for more of a young adult audience, right? Those are more PG-13. And again, there's a larger cast. There's more complexity to the storytelling. There's more nuance to what the characters are doing and saying. And there's a little bit more adhesion to theme. And so, again, it's just taking that and upping it to the nth degree. And then because we wanted to do a mature reader's book, it was, what makes something R-rated? Here's a list. Let's check the boxes. And
Right.
because it was my first time doing it, I just checked all the boxes.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I'm going to take the opportunity now to remind you out there in the audience, as I always do, we're doing these crowdfunding interviews that, hey, maybe this sounds like exactly your thing. You love Constantine, you love John Wick. Everything Trevor's saying is like scratching your itch, but times are tough. And unfortunately, it's just not in your means right now to support the campaign. The other way that you can help out him and the rest of the creative team, Francesco and what have you, is to share it on social media. Let your local comic shop know. Anybody who wants to get a copy can get a copy. They can tell their friends about it. Let's spread the word and make sure that anybody who wants to become part of the community that's being established here on Zoop for Trevor's project has a chance to see it. Obviously, the best thing would be for you to join the campaign, make a pledge, get the book, and really celebrate it, fall in love with it, and be back for volume 2 and volume 3. That would be great. But again, you can help out even if you don't have the means right now, or maybe it doesn't sound like something you necessarily be interested in. It doesn't cost you anything just to share it. Let's really spread the word for Trevor and Francisco. With that being said, Trevor, why Zoop?
Excellent question. I knew this was going to come up. So when we did the crowdfunding for my last 4 graphic novels, the Albert the Alien graphic novels, we did those through Kickstarter. And since that time, crowdfunding has changed a lot. There are a lot of new services. There are a lot of new capabilities. And I was asking around to friends who they recommended trying out because I was basically starting from scratch. Like, how many of my young readers, my 10-year-old readers, right, are going to transfer over to an R-rated book? Probably not a lot. Their parents might. Their parents might be interested in it. But and so there was an opportunity just to kind of start fresh. And a lot of people that I know were doing campaigns on Zoop. A couple of my editor friends in the comic book scene were recommending to try Zoop. And I had a meeting with the team, and I really liked what they were talking about, what their services model was, and how they kind of operate. And so I've had some really, really positive conversations with Jordan and Eric and the other team members over at Zoop. I really like the mission and what they're trying to do. And I think that for somebody who, like me, is coming back into crowdfunding, which can be a slog, right? Like it can be a very challenging thing to do when you've got a day job and other things on top of your plate. The support that they provide on there is so critical to helping get the word out and to help make the connections to potential readers and fans. So long answer to a short question once again. I really liked what Zoop offered. I really enjoyed meeting with the team, and I'm extremely humbled and honored to be partnering with the Zoop team to bring this book out into the world.
Yeah, and then when the campaign's all said and done, you can spend your time writing instead of packing and shipping books, right? Which is
Right.
what we want you to be doing.
You know,
That's
back
yeah.
when we did the Albert books, like again, it was my wife and I in the kitchen. with a printer, just printing out labels saying like what goes into this order, right? Checking the list 2 or 3 times to make sure it's in there. And Zoop does all of that for us, which is fantastic. And the other thing too is they make connectivity to the printers, to the shippers, to all of those people, where again my relationships are several years old and may no longer be relevant because the last time I did this was 2018. And the world is a very different place since then. And so some of those players that I used to work with don't even exist anymore. And so again, I've felt very blessed to be partnered with Zoop on this particular project, and the fact that they do all of those services is really just a testament, I think, to the knowledge and expertise that they bring, as well as a burden that gets lifted off the creator's shoulders. To your point, right? Because I can focus on what I do best, and they can focus on getting the word out and fulfillment.
Yeah, exactly. Well, why don't you let everybody know what are some of the tiers? So, in the interest of full disclosure, everybody, we're recording this about not quite a week before the campaign goes live. So, sometimes it's already live and we get to say, hey, it's already funded or half funded or what have you. That's not the case this time. It hasn't launched yet. But by the time you're hearing this, this is going to drop on launch day. It is live, so you can go to the link in the show notes and go and check it out and what have you. So when they go there, Trevor, what are some of the rewards? And obviously, you can get probably a digital copy of the book, a hard copy of the book. What are the formats? How many pages? And what are some of the other things that are being offered?
Sure. The book is going to be 132 full color pages. It's going to have 5 chapters, I think, in there. So the original chapter that we have, as well as the 4 chapters that kind of continue that story from that original story that we did with the previous publisher. But again, that one is now in color, which we've never seen before. So that I think is really exciting. It's going to have a bunch of character sketches and designs. To your question about the rewards, so you can get, yes, the digital copy, you can get a physical copy, and we're going to do a deluxe hardcover for it. And then I just found out today, again, a week before we're launching, that we're going to get an exclusive cover from my buddy Ben Templesmith.
Oh,
So
wow.
he's going to do a cover for us. So the cover that you're seeing right here is the original one that Francesco had put together. Ben's doing a new cover for us, which will only be available to people on Zoop. We're not going to let that be available after the Zoop campaign ends. In addition to getting either a digital or physical copy, you can get that signed by me as well if you'd like. We also have retailer bundles available. And then Francisco, again, he's over in Italy, but he's willing to do sketches and commissions for a very limited number of people. Whatever your favorite characters are, he loves to draw Silverhawks, by the way. So if you say Silverhawks, like he will become your best friend. But he will do sketches for a certain tier and a certain number of people, and then full-on digital commissions, which will get emailed to you, and you can print those out. If you would like those to print, like us to print those out, we can talk about that because we can have that ship out with your book as well, and have that on like a nice cardstock kind of printing and high quality. But so those are going to be in very, very limited supply. My guess is that those are going to disappear within the first few days, if not the first week. And then on top of that, we're going to have add-ons into the story as well. So some of the other comics that I have made will be available in either digital or physical copies. The entire Albert the Alien series, which again won a whole bunch of awards and is a great gift for either your kids or the kid inside of all of us. And then a couple new series that I am going to be doing crowdfunding for in the next year or so. These graphic novels are done, but this would be like a first issue introduction to them. Another horror story called Demon City, which is kind of like a crime noir supernatural murder mystery. A book called Consumer, which is a cyberpunk heist story, and then a new urban fantasy series that I'm doing called The Witches of Eastwick Boulevard, which is about 2 sisters that discover they have magical powers and decide they want to defend their town from things that go bump in the night. So all of these and more will be available as a part of the campaign. Again, the one that I'm super excited about is this Ben cover, which he told me he's going to get me a preview of that in the next week or so. So around the time this launches, I'll have like a sketch of what it's going to look like, and we'll be updating backers and people who pledge as that progress comes through, because I'm super stoked to get that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Super exciting. So again, everybody, remember there's a link in the show notes. You can go check out the campaign. It's live as you're listening to this. see what rewards are available, what tickles your fancy, and join the campaign so you can check out this awesome book. So, Trevor, thanks so much for taking the time to tell us about this awesome story. It's worth your time, everybody. It really, really is. And I think it kind of stands on its own as a, you know, if you didn't come back for a second volume, but the fact that it's, as you said, almost done, I'm anticipating that as well, and see how everything wraps up. But yeah, let's go for the moon here. Let's go for all three volumes. I think that would be fantastic. But as we're winding down here, why don't you tell everybody where's the best place to follow you online, follow your work? If someone has questions about the campaign or what have you, can they reach out on social media? Like, where are you most active?
100%. Trevor A. Mueller is my everything, my website, my newsletter, my social media. I am on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads. Find me, follow me, friend me. I'm fairly active on most of those sites. The best way to get in touch with me, obviously, if I think you can do it through the campaign, but if not, I'm very active on Instagram and Twitter. And then I have a newsletter at trevoramueller.com/newsletter that you can join. We'll be making updates and stuff through there. Obviously not the same updates that we're making through the campaign, but that's the easiest way for me to bypass any social media algorithms and let people know what I'm working on and how they can get a hold of the latest issue or the new preview of something. I like to show a lot of behind the scenes stuff. I probably show too much in my newsletter, if I'm being honest, because I'll talk about things that don't come out for like another year. And so, but that's a lot of fun. But Trevor A. Mueller is me everywhere. Find me, follow me, friend me, and I look forward to connecting. And yes, please send me questions. Would love to engage in conversation about them. I'm starting to do live streams on Tuesdays on my Instagram at 3 p.m. Central Time, where I just call it a Q&A Tuesday, right? Like, ask me your or tell me your questions, and I will answer your questions, and we'll hang out for half an hour, however long we feel like hanging out. And I make those available on demand afterwards within my feed. So if you miss one, you can still catch up and see what we discussed that week.
Great. So again, everybody, link in the show notes of the campaign. Go check it out. There's preview pages there. You can see the art. You can get an idea of the story. You can see examples of what Trevor and I were talking about with multiple narrators. And so that may engender some questions. And that now you know where to go to ask those questions. So I'll put a link to Trevor's website in the show notes, as well as a link to at least a few of the social media. So if you're having trouble finding them, you can go and click there. So again, Trevor, best of luck with the campaign. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure. And, again, I'm super excited to get the book out. I'm so happy to hear that you enjoyed it. So thanks so much.
Yep. And to all you listeners, well, thank you as well. We appreciate the support as always, and we will talk to you next time.
Thank you.